Hello Internet, welcome to... I actually have no idea what this is. This new house I live in doesn't exactly have a spot to set up a camera, so facecam videos are off the table for a while. All you need to know is I look like this, I sound like this, and for the foreseeable future, my videos look like this. So stay tuned to see a filthy Frank clone imitate the editing styles of both Matt Rose and Matt Pat with a dash of summoning salt for good measure. Originality is dead. Merry Christmas. I think by now it's safe to say that everyone already knows the story of the Santa Claus. Scott Calvin, a divorced business exec dad, has his son over on Christmas. They hear footsteps on the roof, he goes out to investigate, startles Santa off the roof, puts on his suit, and becomes the next Santa Claus. Weirdly depressing hijinks ensue.
All of your visitation rights are suspended.
The movie did well, so they gave it 2 sequels, one that's okay, and one that doesn't exist, and they bring it all back with a Disney Plus show 30 years later. A show which I will pray to God you haven't watched, not only because it's so aggressively mid, but also because I have so many things to say about it existing in the first place. I will get to that later. This video is not about that show, nor is it about the sequels. Today I want to take a look at the first film in a vacuum to pick it apart based on its original artistic intent. Because we all know that when it comes to sequels, Disney is the last studio you should ever trust. I've been alive for 20 years, and over every single one of them, I've been raised and sent out into the world with a yearly tradition of watching this movie. And for 19 of those years, I had gotten the same experience out of it. That all changed at Denny's. By this point in the movie, Tim Allen had arrived home from his office Christmas party. He took his son for the holiday, much to the dismay of his son, and in a very realistically uncomfortable manner, absolutely fucked everything up. In his attempt to make a decent Christmas dinner, he burnt the turkey. Okay, that's putting it gently. The turkey spontaneously combusted. Dad! There is no more turkey. The turkey was already dead. It is now double dead. It is a charcoal bird now. Pitch black, black as sin, black as tar.
He said, "You black?" I said, "Of course we are black." He said, "No, you black as shit." This said the difference between me and midnight is 11:59. When God said, "Let there be light," I was out of town. Every time I take a shit, I think my dick fell off.
The point is, the turkey isn't edible. So, to try and salvage the night, he takes his son Charlie to Denny's.
Everybody likes Denny's. It's an American institution.
That might sound like a paid product placement, and it probably is, but there's something that makes me question that. And that is just how far out of their way they go to show you how sad and pathetic this place is. See, one very peculiar detail stuck out to me in here. Asians. I shit you not, every single character in the establishing shots of this Denny's are Asian businessmen, specifically Japanese businessmen.
Are you with Hatsutashi?
It took me a while to really understand what the point of that was. It may sound trivial, but think about it for a second. When you're writing a story, there is no such thing as a coincidence. You don't fill the entire room in the opening shot of a setting with multiples of the same type of character for no reason. Any movie with competent writers and directors does things like this with a clear intended purpose. And then, it hit me. After scanning the rest of the Denny's, I realized that each and every character in the background of this restaurant was strategically placed here to establish the archetypes of people who would be at a Denny's on Christmas Eve night. I don't think I can stress just how much they love Denny's over in Japan. From what I can tell, they hold it in just as high a regard as they do KFC, a very famous thing to eat on Christmas over there. It makes sense that after traveling across the world for a meeting they clearly just got out of, they would go to eat somewhere that makes them feel close to home. After all, that's what Christmas is for. The director could have just filled this restaurant with extras and no one would have blinked, but instead they go out of their way to show you directly that the only people who would be at a Denny's on Christmas are foreign businessmen and single dads who can't cook. Realizing that the scene was making a goal to set up character archetypes gave me this newfound respect for the movie. I started to realize it may just be a little bit smarter than people give it credit for. It made me want to look around and try to decode every character's backstory. These guys look like your typical church-going Midwestern nuclear family. Maybe their mom passed away recently. This guy looks just as divorced as Scott, but his general appearance tells me he might be slightly less well off. Same with these two as they walk in. But then something else hit me. If all of the kids in this scene are accompanied by their respective adults, then who the fuck is that? This random kid in the middle of a Denny's with no parents, and a festive scarf, and pointy ears. Wait a minute. That's not a kid. That's an elf! 20 years. I've been watching this movie for 20 years and only just now noticed that there's a Christmas elf just strolling through the background way before any mention of Santa being real. It felt a little bit surreal. Finding something new in a childhood classic reignited a spark of magic in this movie that I hadn't felt in years. So I did what any self-respecting autistic dude would do. I started hyperfixating. For the sake of transparency, there's one last little detail I've left out. While rewatching this film for the first time this year, I may or may not have been absolutely 100% high out of my goddamn mind.
They call this shit Malaysian Airlines, cause once you get some of this, you're fucking gone, dude. You're fucking gone.
I was motherfucking flavor blasted extra cheddar Pepperidge Farm Goldfish Baked Snack Crackers flavor blasted extra cheddar 27.3 ounces. The snacks were smiling back that night. As badly as I wanted to, I physically could not take notes, so instead I just kept watching and let the ideas form themselves, forcing myself to retain whatever crackpot theories came into fruition to write down in my notes the next day. And on my second rewatch, I cracked this movie wide open. First things first. This is not the only background elf in the movie. When you search for details about them, you get innocuous explanations for why they're there. But those explanations are trash! And here's why. Let's first talk about where and when the ones I found were throughout the movie. I found 3. I know there's more, stay with me here. Number 1. The little girl in this window. You find her pointy little gremlin ears as she turns around and runs away. Number 2. The Denny's boy. The only kid in the restaurant there by himself with no parents. And 3. The little boy sitting directly behind Charlie in his classroom. As you see when Charlie blurts to the class,
"My dad is Santa Claus."
This kid not only is the one child in the room who doesn't laugh, but he goes the extra mile to stay completely stoic. Find the others yourself. The boy in the classroom, to me, was the most astonishing. It recontextualized what is probably the funniest line in the movie.
"We don't say stupid, and we don't say elves. They're little people."
To elevate this teacher to a whole new level of clueless. You said that directly in front of an actual, legitimate Christmas elf. But stop. Why is he here? Sure, I guess you could give the watching over the children explanation, but again, that explanation sucks. From a writing standpoint, you'll notice he is only there to show him not reacting to
"My dad is Santa Claus."
No, this guy is here to keep an eye on Scott. Take a look at the other two. This little girl is waiting in the window of a toy store, hears him driving towards her, and runs away. This guy leaves the Denny's right as Scott is taken to his table. Both of them only leave as Scott approaches, almost like they knew he was coming and were waiting for him. But why would they do that? If this movie is about a freak accident that kills Santa, then why would they be watching the guy responsible before the accident ever happened? Unless... Unless... the events of this movie were planned. Let me ask you some questions here. Why does the original Santa spend so long and make so much noise on Scott's roof? The movie clearly establishes that isn't how these stops go. Santa gets there, immediately floats over, and silently slips down the chimney. No contact with the roof, no kneeling at the chimney, no shouting at the top of his lungs. Why does Santa falling off the roof look so fake? Watch this.
Hey, yo! What's up?
It's easy to take something that cheap looking from a traditional 90s family movie and just write it off as bad acting and low effort movie. But as I just showed you, this movie is not low effort. Why does Santa wave as Scott leaves? As a kid, I didn't think much of it. I thought it was just the final bit of magic passing the torch with a friendly wave. But the conclusion I've come to after a thorough analysis of the movie gives that little gesture an entirely new meaning. This fall looks fake because it is fake. It was never meant to look real in the first place. Santa waves because the fall did not kill him. He didn't die because he can't die because you can't kill Santa. Every single event over the course of this night is carefully calculated by Saint Nick himself, all with the help from his elves. That's why none of them are surprised when Scott arrives at the North Pole instead of the old Santa. They knew. They were watching him all night, keeping tabs on exactly where he is at all times. That's why Bernard says,
the other Santa disappeared, right?
Note him using disappeared and not died. That's also why Bernard avoids the question,
What happens if I fall off the roof? What do I do if I fall off a roof?
He isn't worried about it. He knows it won't matter. Deep breath, Daniel. Deep breath. And that, in turn, opens up even more questions. Why are all of the elves so rude to Scott when he first shows up? What brought this change on in the first place? Where in the world is the old Mrs. Claus during all of this? And out of all of the people who exist on the planet, why would they choose Scott? Well, you guys know me, and if you don't yet, you will. Just know that I wouldn't be making this video if I didn't have every single answer tucked neatly away in my back pocket. The elves' attitudes. To say they're all dismissive of him would be an understatement. As soon as he gets there, he's met with cold shoulders, snide remarks, and absolutely no explanation until he pries it out of the head elf Bernard.
It means you put on the suit, you're the big guy.
It's ridiculous. I never put on a suit just to...
Try to understand this!
Maybe they just liked the other guy better. It's entirely possible that none of them wanted this change to happen. It's perfectly reasonable to still be salty. It's a massive change that they clearly saw coming and had to spend a long time preparing themselves for. It can't be easy. But let's extend that a little further. What if it's not just the old Santa they miss? After all, Santa isn't dead. The other guy disappeared, but the magic of Christmas, and by proxy, the spirit of Father Christmas, is still very much alive in Scott, even if Mr. Home Improvement himself doesn't know it yet. The elves aren't mourning Santa, they're mourning Mrs. Claus. I think now is as good a time as any to bring up the sequels. Specifically, the second movie and the Disney Plus show. Again, the Santa Claus 3 does not exist. In 2, the main plot centers around Santa Scott facing the threat of losing his Santa magic. I hate how many times I have to say Santa in this script. The only way he gets to keep it is by going out to get a wife. The movie claims this is something every Santa has to do, a plot point which is then contested in the Disney Plus series, because of course it is. In it, Scott's Mrs. Claus, Carol, starts to question just what the hell was up with the previous Mrs. Claus, a question which the show chooses to answer extremely vaguely.
When you scared the last Santa to death, and you took over his job, did he, in fact, have a wife?
I don't know.
You never bothered to ask.
In Season 1, Episode 5, we get a pretty massive info dump about Santa history. Apparently, according to this episode, Scott Calvin was chosen by Santa, and the fall off the roof was fake.
You think someone yelling, "Hey," really made me slip and fall? I'm Santa, baby. I have been on millions of roofs.
The show says that the last Santa made the Santa Claus, the Mrs. Claus, the Escape Clause, and every other arbitrary contractual obligation Scott Calvin has been subjected to for the past 3 decades.
The clauses were created to guide you.
Learning this leaves Carol and the audience thinking she's the first.
All the clauses, all of them were created for us.
So I was the first Mrs. Claus.
I didn't ask.
And that is where I call bullshit. Carol can't be the first because Mrs. Claus has existed since 1849. This Santa absolutely had a Mrs. Claus. There is no way he didn't. It wouldn't make sense. The most common question people ask is, where is she?
All of this is without even mentioning the mysterious disappearances of the former Mrs. Clauses. The Mrs. Claus is a thing that all Santas are bound by, after all. The prior Santa had to have a family too. So what happened to the former Mrs. Claus when Santa died? Suspicious much?
They speculate that they just kicked her out, but that doesn't sit right with me. It hinges on Santa disappearing being an accident, which I have well established by now it was not. The only logical conclusion to me is that Mrs. Claus is dead, and if I'm right, that answers the first 3 questions. Why are the elves so rude? They're grieving. What brought on this change? Santa didn't want to keep going without his wife. Where's Mrs. Claus? She's dead. But that leaves us with the last question. Why Scott? I'd like to answer that question with another question. How long have the elves been keeping an eye on Scott? No, really. How long? We're never given an answer. Hell, I'm not even sure the other movies know about them. God knows they can barely keep their lore straight. I speculate that Scott has been chosen for the role of Santa since he was a kid. Maybe even since birth. The fact that the movie draws attention to his name having the same initials as Santa Claus can't be a coincidence. There are no coincidences in this movie. I refuse to believe that. Maybe that's why he grew up to be an exec at a toy company. He always had the spirit of Saint Nick in him. But that's just a theory.
A film theory. And...
Hold on. I'm not done with you yet. So real talk, that's my interpretation of this movie. Santa feels ready to pass the torch, so, with his elves, he sets up a way to give his responsibility to someone who he knows was always destined to take it. And since piecing all of that together, I've developed a deeper kind of respect for this movie that I just can't find for the rest of the franchise. There's a reason I said the third movie doesn't exist. Its climax hinges on Scott becoming Santa being an accident. And even disregarding the things the first movie goes out of its way not to tell you, it gets shaky when held up to the series. It doesn't even work with the second movie, since Jack Frost's Santa 12 years later doesn't have a Mrs. Claus. It all just screams that they didn't think of this stuff. And why would they? Let me be clear, there is one very obvious reason that they made anything after the first movie. Disney is a very big fan of your money. The first one was clever, sure, but it was successful. So much so that they didn't feel any need to make anything after anywhere near as well thought out. That's not why people watched. To the average viewer, it's just a fun and unassuming Christmas movie. Why hide details no one will look for? Why even think about them? It just feels gross to me. As the franchise goes on, the plots get more convoluted, the elves get more flanderized, and the designs get more ridiculous. The first movie was simple and well constructed, with a deeper plot just waiting there for anyone who looked for it. That's all just gone now. The series actively destroys the subtext that the movie spent so much effort setting up by just telling you all of it. And while I'm on the subject, the fact that every review of this movie seems to miss everything I've talked about today really bothers me. Danny Gonzalez's review of this movie calls it the worst Christmas movie ever made. Every single criticism he has is somehow tied to everything I mention here. There's just something about YouTubers who review things for the sake of comedy that intrinsically ties how they analyze media to deep-rooted cynicism. The same thing happens with CinemaSins. These two take every single piece of this movie that I've demonstrated is a deliberate artistic choice attempting to nudge you towards looking harder for answers, and just label every one of them plot holes. I don't understand this movie, so it must be bullshit. That is not how you approach art. If there's anything you take from this video, make it 2 things. 1, The Santa Claus is a very underrated and well-made movie. Put some respect on its name. And 2, when you watch something, anything at all, that feels like it's trying to tell you something, don't ignore that feeling. Look, think, look again. You just might come away surprised at how much of the world you discover. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. I've got a lot more like it in my head, so hopefully I'll get around to them. I do want to turn this into a job. Special thanks to my patrons, Parker Ryland, Silver Malware AI, and 1000 Dumplings. If you really like the video, maybe consider subscribing to my Patreon. That's all I'll say about that. Goodbye, thanks for watching, and get the hell out of my house.